anything that government does to correct a market failure is not a freebie. So when we say lack of access to credit or access to finance, what we mean is a profitable business opportunity not being financed.
Whenever they invested that money in the working capital, we find that roughly 50 to 60% is the marginal return they generate.
So lending to smaller firms is not a loss-making proposition for at overall economy. Hello all, welcome to another episode of Finterpret, a podcast series based on academic papers brought to you by Center for Analytical Finance at ISB. This is Prasanna Tantri. I teach finance at ISB. With me we have a new guest today, Ashirbad Mishra. He is a first year PhD student at ISB. He is worked with ISB also, and you are a math major from ISER. Dangerous person. I don't know. My job. I hope you will not make my job very difficult. I have these IIT people all the time, and half of my energy goes in translating what they say. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself? What is this ISER? Everybody knows about IIT and IACs and all that. What is this ISER? How do what do you learn there, and how do you get in there and all that?
Yeah, so it's the full form is Indian Institute of Science Education Research.
Mm-hmm.
It is run by the MHRD. Now it is Ministry of Education.
Mm-hmm.
And these institutes were established specifically to train undergrad students in science research, in the basic science research,
Mm-hmm.
across disciplines like mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, computer science, and so on.
Okay, so you have to clear some difficult exam to get through this.
Yeah, earlier
Like
it used to be the Kishore Vaigyanik Protshahan Yojana, KVPY,
Right.
and as well as the IIT JEE advanced
Okay.
exam.
So from there, you've done maths and now you're in finance.
Right.
Nice. So today we're going to discuss about access to finance. That's the topic that we're discussing. Viewers, last episode we spoke about labor laws, and the whole theme was, irrespective of what government comes to power, one of the things that they have to do, we suggest that, of course, who are we to say they have to do? We suggest that they work on labor laws. Equally important is improving access to finance. Access to finance should be one of the top, should be at the top of the agenda of any new government that's going to take power. And Ashirbad, I think we should clarify when we talk about access to finance, we are not talking about giving some freebie and all that. This whole definition of freebie needs to be, I've seen many definitions, right? So one convenient definition is anything which is done by the party that you like is a reform. Anything that is done by a party that you don't like is a freebie. That is one convenient definition. Let's not forget, we are serious researchers, and we don't fall by that. But there are other people who sort of, serious people, not with any ill intentions, think that anything that has a positive benefit is not a freebie. For example, if I show that Narega leads to some increase in consumption, so it is good, right? Or Kisan Samman Nidhi leads to some investments, that is good. That is not the definition, that we are looking at. We think that anything that government does to correct a market failure is not a freebie. Even if you give it for free, that is why you have a government. See, law and order, we can't implement ourselves, people like you and me. If I don't give you high grades in your exam and you come to threaten and kill me, then I need somebody to protect, right? So that's why I need a government. So similarly, access to finance is one area where it has been documented again and again that markets don't do a very good job when it comes to the poor. So when it comes to the big firms, there is enough and more evidence that markets do a good job. Reliance or any large firm wants to raise money, they can raise money from entire world. Adani recently raised money from Japanese market, right? Or in dollars, some $4 or $5 billion, right? For 18 years. 18 years. 3 billion or 2.5, 3 billion for 18 years. There is no problem. But the problem is when it comes to the poor. When it comes to the poor, access to finance is a problem. So can you tell me, when we say poor do not have access to finance, what do we actually mean? Before we even get into research and discussing papers on it, because this whole podcast is based on academic papers, right? So what do these papers mean when they say that somebody lacks access to finance?
So one of the primary area where people have documented about the lack of access to finance is the credit market.
Mm-hmm.
So be it the poor households or the smaller micro enterprises,
Mm-hmm.
which are running literally on the survival basis, be it the street vendors or the small scale businesses. So by lack of access to finance, they mean that they do not have access to the required amount of credit they need.
Yeah, so that's what this thing has to be defined. When you say what do you mean by required amount of credit, you know.
Right.
So let's say, let me give you a simple example. Let's say there is a flower vendor. Okay, there is a flower vendor. He goes and buys some flower, or vegetable vendor buys some vegetables and sells. Now, if this person is given some X rupees extra, if his or her business can generate additional profits, he has a business, he or she has a business where if he or she had more money, their profits would have increased.
Right.
But currently they are not able to make that investment. Right. That means the marginal return, what we call in finance as marginal return, an additional rupee, if it is put into that business, that can generate profits. So if think about a large firm, Infosys tomorrow has a project, and if they realize that if they invest more, they can make some more dollars, don't you think they will raise money in like half an hour?
Right,
or
easily.
5 days, 10 days? But this is the case when it comes to small borrowers. They have business opportunities. This flower vendor can sell more flowers. This fruit vendor can sell more fruits. Vegetable vendor can sell more vegetables. The problem is they do not have enough money to invest and buy what is required for them to sell.
Right.
So therefore they are losing out on profit making opportunities. So situation where there is a business opportunity but you are not able to exploit it, that is access, you know, that is lack of access to finance.
Right.
So lack of access to finance doesn't mean that, you know, tomorrow PhD student goes to a bank, you know, it's risky, right? Bank will not give you a loan. That does not mean, who knows what kind of thesis you will come out with and what will happen. That is not lack of access to finance. Lack of access to finance is somebody has a credible business, there is a profit making opportunity, they know that it's going to work, but banks are not able to lend. Banks don't lend, or they're
not willing to lend.
Yeah. So if money goes there, there is going to be profit. This is why it's a market failure.
Correct.
There is an opportunity which is not happening, right? That is where government needs to come in. So when we say lack of access to credit or access to finance, you know, credit is one form of finance.
Correct.
What we mean is a profitable business opportunity not being financed, you know, because of various frictions, you know, because of various reasons. We'll discuss that. That is the definition of a lack of access to finance.
Right.
Now let's come to research. So, and you were looking at McKinsey and Woodruff, I know. So what does research say? Does this exist? Does this problem that small firms are not able to raise enough money to fund profitable project, does it exist? Has someone gone and studied? What does this paper do? Can you explain?
So the paper that we are discussing, or that you just mentioned, it was published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics.
And I have already explained to the viewers last time what does Quarterly Journal of Economics mean.
Correct. It is one of the topmost economics journal in the world.
With an acceptance rate of 5% or so.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they tried to study the returns to capital in the micro enterprises, and the study was based on Sri Lanka. So
returns to capital, you mean if I put in additional money in this firm, how much profits that that firm will make, that business will make?
Net profit divided by the net investment.
Sure.
So they studied this. So they did this experiment in Sri Lanka when there was a natural calamity. People's personal capital and other things have kind of been eroded.
Sure.
And they go to these micro enterprises.
So when you say micro enterprises, these mean like street vendors, shopkeepers,
correct,
small factories and these kind of stuff.
So they define the micro enterprises to be any business which has less than $500 investment in their fixed assets, apart from land.
Okay.
So maybe it will translate to 40,000 or 50,000.
Their time it would have been even less. This was some 7-8 years ago, right?
Right.
So yeah, whatever. Okay, fair enough.
So they go and survey these enterprises, take a stock of what are the fixed costs, fixed assets they have, what is the business, where is it, the geographical location, and so on and so forth. Who work there? Have they employed any outsider, or is it being run by the families? So they do this entire survey before beginning, and then they randomly allocate. So they take around 400 to 500 firms under their study, and then they randomly allocate certain firms where they give $100 as a
investment.
$100 investment and there will be certain another firms where they have given $200 investment.
Okay. And there are firms with nothing.
And
so
there
this
are
is like
firms
your
with nothing.
randomized control trial, right? It
Correct.
happens in medicine.
Correct.
You know how when people are testing COVID vaccine,
Right.
what did they do? They got hold of some healthy people, gave vaccine to some people, gave different types of treatment, and this
compared the outcomes.
Salt water to some more.
Right.
That's your placebo, right? And then if actually this made a difference, and then let them mix with the people, and who has a higher probability of these vaccine people should have a lower probability of getting the disease, right? This is exactly the same gold standard applied in economics. This was pioneered by these Nobel laureates Banerjee, Duflo and others, where you actually try to replicate this, what is done in sciences, in economics, through randomized control trials. So what you're telling me is these people went to researchers, McKinsey, Woodruff and others, went to Sri Lanka, imagine the level of effort that's involved in an academic paper. Sometimes I feel sad, Ashirbad, because you have not invested that much. Some random guy comes on television and says stuff without anything. When an academician who's published a paper in a top journal, when he says there is an access to finance is an issue, this is the kind of effort. Right. The guy went to Sri Lanka, figured out 500 firms, and measured them that they are small, and then he made an experiment, maybe a draw of lots or something.
They do it through computer
program or something. They divided these firms into 3 groups. One set of these small vendors got nothing. Others, they actually gave them $100,
right.
And the third category got $200. So this is an experiment as
right.
investment into their business. So did they give everything in cash?
So in the first round, they do give everything in cash, and the entire experiment is run over 5 periods. So each period is roughly around half a year or a quarter, 3/4 of a year.
Okay.
So they give the money, they observe the enterprises, and then they again go to them, take a stock of what has happened, what is the sales right now, what is the revenue, what have they made.
Okay, so they observe them for like 3 years almost, 2.5
correct.
years. Again, this is again a pain, right? This is when I participate in some government committee discussions and all. When I cite a paper, I see sometimes people countering with some newspaper report, or I have seen something. What people don't understand is when we talk, and again, once again, I repeatedly say this. Just because there's a paper doesn't mean that's the final truth. That's the nature of science. This can be rejected. Of course, that's the whole idea of science. We are open for rejection, and so that we learn and grow. The point is, people don't realize when there is a QJ paper saying something, it is not some random opinion of these guys. They have gone to Sri Lanka, done this experiment as close to scientific methods as possible, and observed these firms for almost 3 years. And there also gave cash, gave different kinds of, like vaccine 1, vaccine 2, this kind of vaccine, another kind of vaccine.
Controlling for all externalities.
All kind of environment, and it's randomized,
yes.
Right? So after doing this, what did they find? When they observed them for almost 3 years, okay. What happened to this $100? How much money firms make out of it?
So after the entire duration of observation, they found that on an average, the firms in the treatment group, that is the groups which were given the $100 extra, generated around 50 to 60% marginal return on the investment they received.
So what you mean is the firm which got $100 or actually converted that 100 into 150 or 160
over a period of
a year. Right. This is the kind of return.
Yes.
Imagine some large company having a project which is 60% return, and they should have been able to fund this easily. So right. This means these firms had projects with a return of 60%, but they were not able to invest.
Right.
Because if they were able to invest, they would have already borrowed and they would have exploited it. Fact that when you gave them this money for free, they made 60% out of it. And usually people think when you give them money, they'll drink and they'll run away and all that. Okay. That is not what happened. These guys bought in maybe more stocks, more assets or something, and they made around 50 to 60% annualized return from this, right? So this is their major finding, which means this shows that they seriously lacked credit. If you had given, if they could raise credit from the bank, ideally what should have happened? They should have raised money from the bank,
right?
And
or from any formal source.
Any formal source. Okay, so actually the reason we call it a market failure, that if you have an opportunity where you can make 60%, you should have been able to go to a bank and raise this money.
Right.
Right? the fact that they are making 60% when you give them $100 or $200 for free tells that they could not raise money on their own, right? That's the main message of the paper.
In fact, the same set of authors have written a couple of other papers in different geographical settings. And for example, they wrote a paper where they did a similar study in Mexico, and there they found like astronomically high return of close to 300% annualized.
Oh my God! That means you're saying 60% is a lower bound.
Correct.
So there are basically you're saying, you know, when you say 300%, 100 rupee put in becomes 3 times in 1 year, right? And it's not just 1 year, right? It's they're buying assets. These may give return next year also. So we usually talk about fiscal multiplier. You know, we had a paper on Ayushman Bharat where we were talking about fiscal multipliers, and we said on returns to health could be 3 to 5 times, and this is returns to providing access to finance is also 3 to 5 times. You know, the best estimate of physical infrastructure is 1.5 times. The best estimate. If the government puts in 100, it'll generate GDP worth 1.5 or maximum 2. I have not seen anything more than 2. Rigorous, of course. Random statements, people say anything. Here you are saying the lowest is 60% in a year, and it can go as high as 3 times. This is what you said.
Yes.
But tell me one thing, you know, people can, you know, there could be legitimate concerns, right? Is this returns to investment or is it returns to labor? See, now let's say there is a tailor and you give another sewing machine. It is not that only machine will generate money, right? The person has to do work. So maybe there was some free labor at home, children were sitting at home, or there were people who were out of labor force. So do they take care of that?
Yes, so they do control for all the labor cost that would have been there had that person been paid a market linked wage.
Okay, right.
So adjusting for that wage, the return is.
So this is after accounting for labor cost.
Yes.
This is after so this is pure returns to capital.
Yes.
So the important thing for policymakers to note is if capital flows to these small firms, the minimum return is like 60%.
Correct.
It's crazy. So by no means a program which leads to improved access to finance to poor can be considered a freebie, right? Now let's, you know, and I'm sure this has been replicated in different countries and different places. In fact, I remember a paper by Banerjee and Duflo. They look at SME, small and medium enterprises in India. So what happened was the definition of SME was changed several times. You know, if you had plant and machinery up to 60 lakhs, earlier it was considered SME. In 2002, they made it 1 crore, 3 crore, and then they made it 1 crore. So what they do is when it was increased from 60 lakh to 3 crore, lot of firms became eligible for this credit. And what they find is they exactly similar, some 80%, if my memory serves me right, some 80%, 70 to 80% return. You know, these are larger firms.
Yes.
That means when banks were sort of forced to lend to them, the incremental return these firms made was 70 to 80%. So lending to smaller firms is not a loss-making proposition for you know, at overall economy level.
And they do not generate more than the market NPA.
Right.
So the NPAs are also similar
it's
to
not that they default or more.
Correct.
But then why don't banks, you know, lend to them? You know, have you looked at papers that examine that point?
Yes. So even this point was raised by Banerjee and Duflo in one of their papers, where they argued.
Journal of Economic Perspectives, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Where they.
There's a nice title. I forget the title. Giving credit where it is due.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the arguments they put forward is the higher fixed cost to service a small loan. Now, by fixed cost, they mean, so if to process any loan, we need some bare minimum documentation to adhere to the norms and regulations.
Whether it's a 100 rupee loan, whether it's a 10,000 rupee loan, this has to be incurred.
This has to be
That's
there.
what you mean, right?
Further, we have to employ someone or some institutional mechanism to recover that loan,
right,
to pay for the infrastructure and so on and so forth. So that is considered as fixed cost.
Okay.
Now, as you just said, even if I have to serve a 100 rupees loan or a 10,000 rupees loan, the bare minimum fixed cost is very high. That is one of the major hindrance for the banks.
And there is a problem, right? And most of these banks in India give secured loans.
Right.
That means you have to pledge something. Now, these small firms have not much to pledge, especially the informal street vendor type firms. So when they have very little of their own assets, so let's say you have assets worth 100 or 10,000 rupees, you will only get loans close to that. And now if there is fixed cost, that fixed cost as a percentage of this loan becomes huge.
Right.
Then I will have to charge some astronomically high interest rate. Even this 60% return may not be sufficient.
Correct.
And then that doesn't work out. If I charge you so much interest rate, and we can discuss some other day, there is a reason why 60-70% interest rate doesn't work out in reality. So this is a problem with banks. So this is one area, therefore government intervention is required.
Right.
There needs to be, there are methods required to, policies required to make sure that access to credit improves for such people. One of the schemes where you were also involved, we were studying this scheme is PM-SVANidhi.
Right.
PM-SVANidhi is one method where what the government has tried to do, you remember the scheme details?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the PM-SVANidhi scheme was primarily targeted to the street vendors. So they, post-COVID, there was a huge working capital crisis for small vendors and small businesses. So they specifically targeted the street vendors in the urban areas, and they
sort of forced banks to lend to them, right?
Yes.
So one way government thought of solving this problem is make sure that banks go and lend.
Correct.
Right? So we have studied and we find that it's had a decent impact.
So our finding also suggests a similar return to capital.
Yes. So what we did, if you remember, can you explain that? We looked at those who use this for business and others.
Right. So we distinguished our sample into a section where they invested their money in the working capital, and the group where they did not invest that money in the working capital. And because these businesses, as we all know, are hugely dependent on the daily cash they require to purchase certain thing and sell it.
Right.
Their fixed cost is very minimal.
Right.
So whenever they invested that money in the working capital, we find that roughly 50 to 60% is the marginal return they generate. Yeah, it's compared to those who did not invest.
Yeah, this is one thing I'm seeing in any paper series that I'm doing, that what we find is what comes out in these papers, which are peer reviewed and published, they're so much replicable. Correct. Something that you find in Africa, another thing you find in Kenya, something, of course magnitude may be different, but the fact that small firms or street vendor type have problem with access to capital, if you give them money, they will generate more than, anywhere between 60 to 200, 300% works everywhere. Right. This is so scientific.
And it is consistent across years.
Across years.
From 2004
that's
to
what people say, people say if there are 3 economies, there are 5 views and 10 views and all of that. Right. These are mostly on random topics. On serious, on topics of research, of course there's difference of opinion. But this is another area where any serious person will not disagree that these firms have this access to finance problem and something needs to be done about it. Right. So we will stop today's discussion at just telling the viewers that look, this is a real problem and there is an opportunity, and some effort has been made in the form of PM-SVANidhi. But what else can be done? What more can be done? What are the other hindrances? We will discuss some other day. So today's key takeaway is that access to finance is a problem. Small firms suffer from it, and one of the things at the top agenda item in this 100-day program of any government that comes in should be improving access to finance for small firms. Right. So thank you so much, Ashirbad.
Thank you, sir.